Hello, bros. We're back with Perfume. Story of a murderer. Put the light on. The story of a murderer. There we go. By Patrick Suskind. I gotta chew some granola bar first. All right, bros, we're back. Perfume, the story of a murderer by Patrick Suskind. Number 20. He came down with a high fever, which for the first few days was accompanied by heavy sweats, but which later, as if the pores of his skin were no longer enough, produced countless pustules. Granuia's body was strewn with reddish blisters. Many of them popped open, releasing their watery contents, only to fill up again. Others grew into true boils, swelling up thick and red, and then erupting like craters, spewing vicious pus and blood streaked with yellow. In time, with his hundreds of ulcerous wounds, Granuia looked like some martyr stoned from the inside out. Naturally, Baldini was worried. It would have been very unpleasant for him to lose his precious apprentice just at the moment when he was planning to expand his business beyond the borders of the capital and out across the whole country. For increasingly, orders for those innovative scents that Paris was so crazy about were indeed coming not only from the provinces but also from foreign courts. And Baldini was playing with the idea of taking care of these orders by opening a branch in the Faubourg Saint Antoine, virtually a small factory, where the fastest moving scents could be mixed in quantity and bottled in quantity in smart little flacons packed by smart little girls and sent off to Holland, England, and Greater Germany. Such an enterprise was not exactly legal for a master perfumer residing in Paris, but Baldini had recently gained the protection of people in high places. His exquisite sense had done that for him. Thanks, buddy. If you're not 12, I'll subscribe back. Not just with the commissary, but also with such important personages as the gentleman holding the franchise for the Paris customs office, or with a member of the Conseil Royal des Finances, and promoter of flourishing commercial undertakings like Monsieur Fedot de Bru. The latter had even held out the prospect of a royal patent, truly the best thing that one could hope for, a kind of carte blanche for circumventing all civil and professional restrictions. It meant the end of all business worries and the guarantee of secure, permanent, unsaleable prosperity. And Baldini was carrying yet another plan under his heart, his favorite plan, a sort of counter-plan to the factory in Faubourg Saint Antoine, where his wares, though not mass-produced, would be made available to anyone. But for a selected number of well-placed, highly placed clients, he wanted to create, or rather have created, personal perfumes that would fit only their wearer, like tailored clothes, would be used only by the wearer, and would bear his or her illustrious name. He could imagine a parfum de la Marquise de Sonnet, a parfum de la Marechal de I can't say these French words. A parfum du d'Aglion, and so on. He dreamed of a parfum de Madame Le Marquis de Pompadour, even of a parfum de Sa Majesté le Roi, in a flagon of costliest cut, a gate with a holder of chased gold, and hidden on the inside of the base the engraved words Giuseppe Baldini, parfumer. The king's name and his own, both on the same object. To such glorious heights had Baldini's ideas risen, and now Grenouilla had fallen ill. Even though Grimaud might he rest in peace, had sworn there had never been anything wrong with him, that he could stand up to anything, had even put the Black Plague behind him, and here he had gone and fallen ill, mortally ill. What if he were to die? Dreadful! For with him would die the splendid plans for the factory, for the smart little girls, for the patent, and for the king's perfume. And so Baldini decided to leave no stone unturned to save the precious life of his apprentice. He ordered him moved from his bunk in the laboratory to a clean bed on the top floor. He had the bed made up with damask. He helped bear the patient up the narrow stairway with his own hands, despite his unutterable disgust at the pustules and festering boils. He ordered his wife to heat chicken broth and wine. He sent for the most renowned physician in the neighborhood, a certain Procope, don't know how to say that, who demanded payment in advance, 20 francs, before he would even bother to pay a call. The doctor lifted up the sheet with dainty fingers, took one look at Grenouille's body, which truly looked as if it had been riddled with hundreds of bullets, and left the room without ever having opened the bag that his attendant always carried about with him. Sounds to me like it's tuberculosis, but we'll see. The case, so began his report to Baldini, was quite clear. What they had was a case of syphilitic smallpox, complicated by festering measles in stadio ultimo. No treatment was called for, since a lancet for bleeding could not be properly inserted into the deteriorating body, which was more like a corpse than a living organism. And although the characteristic pestilential stench associated with the illness was not yet noticeable, an amazing detail and a minor curiosity from a strictly scientific point of view, there could not be the least doubt of the patient's demise within the next 48 hours, as surely as his name was Dr. Procope. Whereupon he exacted yet another 20 francs for his visit and prognosis, 5 francs of which was repayable in the event that the cadaver, with its classic symptoms, be turned over to him for demonstration purposes, and took his leave. Baldini was beside himself. He wailed and lamented in despair. He bit his fingers, raging at his fate. Once again, just before reaching his goal, his grand, very grand plans had been thwarted. At one point, it had been Pelisset and his cohorts with their wealth of ingenuity. Now it was this boy with his inexhaustible store of new sense, this scruffy brat who was worth more than his weight in gold, who had decided now of all times to come down with syphilitic smallpox and festering measles in stadio ultimo. Now of all times. Why not 2 years from now? Why not one? By then he could have been plundered like a silver mine, like a golden ass. He could have gone ahead and died next year, but no, he was dying now. God damn it all, within 48 hours. For a brief moment, Baldini considered the idea of a pilgrimage to Notre Dame, where he would light a candle and plead with the Mother of God for Grenouille's recovery. But he let the idea go. for matters were too pressing. He ran to get paper and ink, then shooed his wife out of the sick room. He was going to keep watch himself. Then he sat down in a chair next to the bed, his notepaper on his knees, the pen wet with ink in his hand, and attempted to take Granuia's perfumatory confession. For God's sake, he dare not slip away without a word, taking along the treasures he bore inside him. Would he not in these last hours leave a testament behind in faithful hands, so that posterity would not be deprived of the finest sense of all time? He, Baldini, would faithfully administer that testament, the canon of formulas for the most sublime sense ever smelled, would bring them all to full bloom. He would attach undying fame to Granuia's name. He would, yes, he swore it by everything holy, lay the best of these scents at the feet of the king, in an agate flagon with gold chasing, and the engraved dedication from Jean Baptiste Grenouille, perfumer, Paris. So spoke, or better whispered, Baldini into Grenouille's ear, unremittingly beseeching, pleading, wheedling. But all in vain. Grenouille yielded nothing except watery secretions and bloody pus. He lay there mute in his damask and parted with those disgusting fluids, but not with his treasures, his knowledge, not a single formula for a scent. Baldini would have loved to throttle him, to club him to death, to beat those precious secrets out of that moribund body, had there been any chance of success, and had it not so blatantly contradicted his understanding of a Christian's love for his neighbor. And so he went on purring and crooning in his sweetest tones, and coddled his patient, and, though only after a grave and dreadful struggle with himself, dabbed with cooling presses the patient's sweat-drenched brow and the seething volcanoes of his wounds, and spooned wine into his mouth, hoping to bring words to his tongue. All night long, and all in vain, in the gray of dawn he gave up. He fell exhausted into an armchair at the far end of the room and stared. No longer in rage, really, but merely yielding to silent resignation at Grenouille's small dying body there in the bed, whom he could neither save nor rob, nor from whom he could salvage anything else for himself, whose death he could only witness numbly, like a captain watching his ship sink, taking all his wealth with it into the depths. And then all at once the lips of the dying boy opened, and in a voice whose clarity and firmness betrayed next to nothing of his immediate demise, he spoke. Tell me, Maitre, are there other ways to extract the scent from things besides pressing or distilling? Baldini, believing the voice had come either from his own imagination or from the next world, answered mechanically, Yes, there are. What are they? Came the question from the bed, and Baldini opened his tired eyes wide. Grenouille lay there, motionless among his pillows. Had the corpse spoken? Where are they? Came the renewed question, and this time Baldini noticed Grenouille's lips move. It's over now, he thought. This is the end. This is the madness of fever, or the throes of death. And he stood up, went over to the bed, and bent down to the sick man. His eyes were open, and he gazed up at Baldini with the same strange, lurking look that he had fixed on him at their first meeting. What are they? He asked. Baldini felt a pang in his heart. He could not deny a dying man his last wish, and he answered, There are 3 other ways, my son. Enfleurage à chaud, enfleurage à froid, and enfleurage à l'eau. They are superior to distillation in several ways, and they are used for extraction of the finest of all scents, jasmine, rose, and orange blossom. Where? Asked Grenouille. In the south, answered Baldini. Above all, in the town of Grasse. Good, said Grenouille. And with that he closed his eyes. Baldini raised himself up slowly. He was very depressed. He gathered up his notepaper, on which he had not written a single line, and blew out the candle. Day was dawning already. He was dead tired. One ought to have sent for a priest, he thought. Then he made a hasty sign of the cross with his right hand and left the room. Granua was, however, anything but dead. He was only sleeping very soundly, deep in dreams, sucking fluids back into himself. The blisters were already beginning to dry out on his skin. The craters of pus had begun to drain, and the wounds to close. Within a week, he was well again. 21. He would have loved then and there to have left for the South, where he could learn the new techniques the old man had told him about, but that was, of course, one of the question, out of the question, pardon. He was, after all, only an apprentice, which was to say, a nobody. Strictly speaking, as Baldini explained to him. This was after he had overcome his initial joy at Granuia's resurrection. Strictly speaking, he was less than a nobody, since a proper apprentice needed to be of faultless, i.e., legitimate birth, to have relatives of like standing, and to have a certificate of indenture, all of which he lacked. Should he, Baldini, nevertheless decide one day to help him obtain his journeyman's papers, that would happen only on the basis of Granuia's uncommon talents, his faultless behavior from then on, and his, Baldini's, own infinite kindness, which, though it often had worked to his own disadvantage, he would forever be incapable of denying. To be sure, it was a good while before he fulfilled his promised kindness, just a little under 3 years. During that period, and with Granuia's help, Baldini realized his high-flying dreams. He built his factory in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, succeeded in his scheme for exclusive perfumes at court, received a royal patent. His fine fragrances were sold as far off as St. Petersburg, as Palermo, as Copenhagen. A musk impregnated item was much sought after even in Constantinople, where God knows they already had enough sense of their own. Baldini's perfumes could be smelled both in elegant offices in the city of London and at the court in Parma, both in the royal castle at Warsaw and in the little schloss of the Graf von Unzulip-Dermold. Having reconciled himself to living out his old age in bitterest poverty near Messina, Baldini was now at age 70 indisputably Europe's greatest perfumer and one of the richest citizens of Paris. Early in 1756, he had in the meantime acquired the adjoining building on the Pont au Change, using it solely as a residence since the old building was literally stuffed full to the attic with scents and spices. He informed Granuia that he was now willing to release him, but only on three conditions. First, he would not be allowed to produce in the future any of the perfumes now under Baldini's roof, nor sell their formulas to third parties. Second, he must leave Paris and not enter it again for as long as Baldini lived. And third, he was to keep the first two conditions absolutely secret. He was to swear to this by all the saints, by the poor soul of his mother, and on his own honor. Granuia, who neither had any honor nor believed in any saints or in the poor soul of his mother, swore it. He would have sworn to anything. He would have accepted any condition Baldini might propose, because he wanted those silly journeyman's papers that would make it possible for him to live an inconspicuous life, to travel undisturbed, and to find a job. Everything else was unimportant to him. What kind of conditions were those anyway? Not enter Paris again? What did he need Paris for? He knew it down to its last stinking cranny. He took it with him wherever he went. He had owned Paris for years now. Not produce any of Baldini's top-selling perfumes, nor not pass on their formulas, as if he could not invent 1,000 others just as good and better, if and when he wanted to. But he didn't want to at all. He did not in the least intend to go into competition with Baldini or any other bourgeois performer. He was not out to make his fortune with his art. He didn't even want to live from it if he could find another way to make a living. He wanted to empty himself of his innermost being, of nothing less than his innermost being, which he considered more wonderful than anything else. This is Perfume by Patrick Suskind, The Story of a Murderer, which is a novel. He wanted to empty himself of his innermost being, of nothing less than his innermost being, which he considered more wonderful than anything else the world had to offer. And thus Baldini's conditions were no conditions at all for Granuglia. He set out in spring. Early one May morning, Baldini had given him a little rucksack, a second shirt, 2 pairs of stockings, a large sausage, a horse blanket, and 25 francs. That was far more than he was obligated to do, Baldini said, considering that Granuglia had not paid a soul in fees for the profound education he had received. He was obligated to pay 2 francs in severance, nothing more, but he could no more deny his own kindly nature than he could the deep sympathy for Jean Baptiste that had accumulated in his heart over the years. He wished him good luck in his wanderings, and once more wanted him emphatically not to forget his oath. With that, he accompanied him to the servants' entrance, where he had once taken him in, and let him go. He did not give him his hand. His sympathy did not quite reach that far. He had never shaken hands with him. He had always avoided so much as touching him, out of some kind of sanctimonious loathing, as if there were some danger that he could be infected or contaminated. He merely said a brief adieu, and Granuglia nodded and ducked away and was gone. The street was empty. 22. Oh, this is almost the end of part 1. 22. Baldini watched him go, shuffling across the bridge to the island, small, bent, bearing his rucksack like a hunchback, looking from the rear like an old man. On the far side, where the street made a dog leg at the Palais des Parlements, he lost sight of him and felt extraordinarily relieved. He had never liked the fellow. He could finally admit it now. He had never felt comfortable the whole time he had housed him under his roof and plundered him. He felt much as would a man of spotless character who does some forbidden deed for the first time, who uses underhanded tricks when playing a game. True, the risks that people might catch up with him was small, and the prospects for success had been great, but even so, his nervousness and bad conscience were equally great. In fact, not a day had passed in all those years when he had not been haunted by the notion that in some way or other he would have to pay for having got involved with this man. If only it turns out all right, that had been his continual, anxious prayer. If only I succeed in reaping the profits of this risky adventure without having to pay the piper. If only I succeed. What I'm doing is not right, but God will wink his eye. I'm sure he will. He has punished me hard enough many times in my life, without any cause, so that it would only be just if he would deal graciously with me this time. What wrong have I actually done, if there has been a wrong? At the worst, I am operating somewhat outside guild regulations by exploiting the wonderful gifts of an unskilled worker and passing off his talent as my own. At the worst, I have wandered a bit off the traditional path of guild virtue. At the very worst, I am doing today what I myself have condemned in the past. Is that a crime? Other people cheat their whole life long. I have only fudged a bit for a couple of years. And only because of purest chance I was given a once in a lifetime opportunity. Perhaps it wasn't chance at all, but God Himself, who sent this wizard into my house to make up for the days of humiliation by Pelisset and his cohorts. Perhaps divine providence was not directing himself at me at all, but against Pelisset. That's perfectly possible. How else would God have been able to punish Pelisset other than by raising me up? My luck in that case would be the means by which divine justice has achieved its end, and thus I not only ought to accept it, but I must, without shame and without the least regret. Such had often been Baldini's thoughts during those years, mornings when he would descend the narrow stairway to his shop, evenings when he would climb back up carrying the contents of the cash box to count the heavy gold and silver coins, and at night when he lay next to the snoring bag of bones that was his wife, unable to sleep for fear of his good fortune. But now such sinister thoughts had come to an end. His uncanny guest was gone and would never return again. Yet the riches remained and were secure far into the future. Baldini laid a hand to his chest and felt, beneath the cloth of his coat, that little book beside his beating heart. 600 formulas were recorded there, more than a whole generation of perfumers would ever be able to implement. If he were to lose everything today, he could, with just this wonderful little book, be a rich man once again within a year. Truly, he would not ask for more. From the gables of the houses across the way, the morning sun fell golden and warm on his face. Baldini was still looking to the south, down the street in the direction of the Palais des Parlements. It was simply too delightful not to see anything more of Grenouille. And washed over by a sense of gratitude, he decided to make that pilgrimage to Notre Dame today, to cast a gold coin in the alms box, to light 3 candles, and on his knees to thank his Lord for having heaped such good fortune on him, and having spared him from retribution. But then, that same afternoon, just as he was about to head for the church, something absurd happened. A rumor surfaced that the English had declared war on France. That was of itself hardly disquieting, but since Baldini had planned to send a shipment of perfume to London that very day, he postponed his visit to Notre Dame and instead went into the city to make inquiries, and from there to go out of his factory in the Faubourg Saint Antoine and cancel the shipment to London for the present. That night in bed, just before falling asleep, he had a brilliant idea. In light of the hostilities about to break out over the colonies in the New World, he would launch a perfume under the name of Prestige du Quebec, a heroic, resinous scent whose success, this much was certain, would more than repay him for the loss of business with England. With that sweet thought in his silly old head, relieved and bedded now on its pillow, beneath which the pressure of the little book of formulas was pleasantly palpable, Maitre Baldini fell asleep and awoke no more in this life. For that night a minor catastrophe occurred, which, with appropriate delays, resulted in a royal decree requiring that little by little all the buildings on all the bridges of Paris be torn down. For with no apparent reason, the west side of the Pont au Change, between the third and fourth piers, collapsed. 2 buildings were hurled into the river so completely and suddenly that none of their occupants could be rescued. Fortunately, it was a matter of only 2 persons, to wit, Giuseppe Baldini and his wife Teresa. The servants had gone out, either with or without permission. Chenet, who first returned home in the small hours slightly drunk, or rather intended to return home, since there was no home left, suffered a nervous breakdown. He had sacrificed 30 long years of his life in hopes of being named heir in Baldini's will, for the old man had neither children nor relatives, and now, at one blow, the entire inheritance was gone. Everything, house, business, raw materials, laboratory, Baldini himself, indeed, even the will, which perhaps might have offered him a chance of becoming owner of the factory. Nothing was found, not the bodies, not the safe, not the little books with their 600 formulas. Only one thing remained of Giuseppe Baldini, Europe's greatest perfumer, a very motley odor of musk, cinnamon, vinegar, lavender, and 1,000 other things that took several weeks to float high above the Seine from Paris to Le Havre. Le Havre. I don't know how to say it. What are we at? 30 minutes. All right, I'm going to stop here. Since there's no audience and no one gives a fuck about this story. But I shall return to it because I'm a fucking champ. Is that the next section? Yeah. So this one's only much smaller. All right, Bobs, that's all.